Hey guys, welcome to our first online lecture. I hope this is helpful for you. I hope you are able to rewind, replay whenever you'd like to learn new information or just, gain more knowledge on the concept. These will be on our channel all year, so make sure that you visit them again before any unit tests or if you're not understanding a concept that we're talking about in class. So let's go ahead and get started. First we're going to talk about aquatic ecosystems, and we're going to talk about the different aquatic ecosystems. So there are two main types of aquatic ecosystems. So these are going to be freshwater and saltwater ecosystems. There are some ecosystems in between these, and we'll talk more about those as well. But for now, we're going to keep it simple with two different ecosystems. Today, we're going to talk about freshwater ecosystems. But ecosystems have different characteristics in them, these freshwater versus saltwater ecosystems. So these are factors such as temperature, sunlight, oxygen, and nutrients. These determine which organisms live in each ecosystem. So you're not going to have exactly the same organisms that are living in one freshwater ecosystem as you are in a saltwater ecosystem because they have different adaptations. They've adapted to the water salinity. What is salinity? So salinity is the amount of salt that is in water. So obviously salt water is going to have a higher salinity or higher salt content, whereas freshwater is going to have a lower salinity rate. So obviously the differences in sunlight are going to make a difference in the ecosystems, even within a freshwater or saltwater biome. So you're going to have different organisms that are on the bottom of these oceans or lakes ecosystems as you are on the surfaces of these ecosystems. And this is because you're going to have different temperatures in each area. You're going to have different amounts of sunlight and different amounts of oxygen and nutrients in each of these areas. So how are we going to group these organisms in aquatic ecosystems? So plankton are the basis of all the aquatic ecosystems. So plankton are drifters. They are the food for most aquatic ecosystems. So they are going to be basically the bottom of the food chain with our producers. So nekton is the next one, and these are free swimming organisms such as fish, whales, and stingrays. Anything that's going to be swimming around in these aquatic ecosystems are going to be nekton. Benthos are bottom dwellers, and these are organisms such as mussels, worms, starfish, barnacles. A majority of these organisms are attached to rocks or other surfaces in the water, and you can find these in rivers, you can find them in lakes, and you can find them in marine or saltwater ecosystems as well. So today we're just going to talk about freshwater ecosystems. So our freshwater ecosystems are going to include lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and wetlands. And we all know what each of these are. We might need a little brush up on some of them, but we're going to talk about the different ecosystems in each of these freshwater systems today. So lakes and ponds. So lakes, ponds, wetlands can form naturally where groundwater reaches the Earth's surface. So they can form from water underground coming up in springs. They can also form from snowmelt coming off of mountains. They can form from rainfall. All of these things can form these different lakes and ponds. They can be structured into horizontal and vertical zones. So a littoral zone is going to be near the shore. So life is more abundant here. There's more plant life. There's more organisms in this area. Why is that? Well, if we think about the elements that establish a viable habitat for organisms, we can think of higher temperatures. So there's going to be higher temperatures at these littoral zones or the surface area of these zones. There's going to be higher oxygen levels, more plant life. There's also going So these are all things that sustain more biodiversity or more life forms in these areas. So farther from the shore of the littoral zones, we're going to have a lot of phytoplankton, and phytoplankton is the most abundant plankton in these aquatic ecosystems. They photosynthesize, so they're basically the producers of the food chains, so they're going to be at the bottom level. So if something happens to this bottom level of the food chain, then it disrupts the whole system. So they're going to be the main source of food for these ecosystems. So then we have the benthic zone. This is the area that are too deep for photosynthesis to occur. So they have very little or no sunlight involved in these areas. And so organisms that have an abundance of sunlight and nutrients and things live on the top. And then these organisms, when they die, they're going to sink to the bottom. And this is going to go into the benthic zone. So a lot of these organisms depend on dead organisms sinking to the bottom. So they're going to be decomposers. So these are organisms such as bacteria and other decomposers that live on dead plants and animals. And then there's also fish that are adapted to cooler waters that also live here. So how do nutrients affect lakes? When we think of nutrients, we think that the more nutrients you have, the better it's going to be, but this isn't always the case. We have here in this picture, we have these little algae plumes. And when we have too much or abundance of nutrients, then it's going to overtake the other elements in the ecosystem, and it's going to kill off organisms that need oxygen. It basically suffocates them. So this is called eutrophication. This is an increase in the amount of nutrients in an aquatic ecosystem. So eutrophication happens naturally in these ecosystems, but humans definitely make it worse. So we use a lot of fertilizers on our crops, on our lawns, and what happens to this fertilizer? When it rains, where does the water go? It's going to go to these ponds and lakes and rivers. And so then we have an abundance of nutrients from these fertilizers, and we have more algae growth from these nutrients. And so when we have more algae growth, it's going to take away other elements from the ecosystem and kill off other organisms. So eutrophication is a big problem in our aquatic ecosystems. So as the amount of bacteria grow from the abundance of algae and plants, the oxygen begins to reduce, killing oxygen-loving organisms like fish and or free-swimming organisms. So now we have freshwater wetlands. So freshwater wetlands are areas of land covered with fresh water for at least part of the year. So it doesn't have to be covered in water all of the year. During different seasons, it's going to have more rainfall, and so it's going to be more aquatic land than other parts of the year. But we're just really finding out how important these wetlands are because animals come and migrate to these wetlands, and they have babies in these wetlands. And so then other animals can migrate and have an abundant food source in these wetlands as well. So these are really important, and we have more policies that are protecting these wetlands as we realize how important they are. So there are two types. There are marshes that contain non-woody plants such as cattails, and then we have swamps that have woody plants such as trees and shrubs. So the functions of the wetland, they're going to absorb and remove pollutants from water that flows through them. So it's kind of a stopping ground for this flow of water, and the water can stop here and kind of filter through before it goes into other rivers and lakes. It also controls flooding by absorbing extra water when rivers overflow. So this is important in our cities and where humans dwell. The more wetlands that we take away and we build houses and buildings on, the less we have to absorb these waters as they flow through in certain seasons. So that's really important for us. Many fish use wetland for feeding and spawning. So they come in here to feed and they come here to have babies. So it's really important for reproduction. They provide homes for native species such as birds. So like I said, the birds can migrate and find some abundance and feeding grounds in these wetlands. And it traps carbon that would otherwise be released as carbon dioxide into the environment. So then we have marshes. These tend to occur on low, flat lands and have little water movement. So it's very swampy, very stagnant water. They're nutrient rich. They contain plants and numerous types of decomposers and scavengers. And like I said, with the wetlands, they attract many migratory birds. And so they're going to migrate and find these places with abundant food sources. The salinity varies because we often have saltwater or ocean water coming in with freshwater, and it forms this brackish environment. So it's kind of has a mild salinity, but it has enough salinity so that certain marine organisms as well as certain fresh organisms can come and spawn and have babies in these brackish environments. So swamps are a little bit different. Swamps occur on flat, poorly drained land, often near streams, so they're also pretty stagnant. Species of trees and shrubs depend on the salinity of the water and climate, so their salinity or their salt content can be different based on their climate. Freshwater swamps are ideal for amphibians, birds, and reptiles. So they also have abundant life forms and are important to the ecosystem. So how do we impact wetlands? So a lot of them have been drained and cleared for farming or development. And like I said earlier, we're starting to get more policies to protect these lands because they are important for not only the ecosystem, but they're important for flood control for our development as well. So wetlands are also vital habitats for wildlife, which we just talked about. Clean water of toxins and are now being protected by law and the federal government. So take a minute and stop the video and answer this question on your notes. How can wetlands reduce damage that is caused by flooding? So go ahead and just take a minute, just pause the video and come back to it when you're ready. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rivers. So we talked about lakes, which are not as free-flowing as rivers. So many of these rivers originate from snowmelt from mountains. So if we have, as you know, with rivers, we have a gravitational force. Many of them start higher in the mountain ranges, and then they flow downward. So at its head, a river is cold, it's full of oxygen, and it runs swiftly through a shallow riverbed. So it's running swiftly due to gravitational pull. It's usually going downward from a mountain range or a mountainous area. And then as rivers flow down a mountain, it becomes warmer, wider, and slower. So this contains more vegetation and less oxygen. But it is warmer waters, and it does not have as much current. So what about life in the river? So there's going to be different life depending on where we are in the river. As we get closer to the headwaters, there's going to be more mosses anchoring themselves to the rocks. There's going to be trout and minnows. They're powerful swimmers, and their bodies are shaped correctly so that the current really doesn't affect them that much. And so they can survive better in these ecosystems. But downstream, we're going to have more plants because they can set roots and they're not obstructed by the current of the river flow. And then the river is rich in sediment because we have these flowing rivers through the mountains and through the rocks, and then it kind of settles down at the base of the stream or river. And fish such as catfish and carp live in these calmer waters. Okay, so what effect can runoff have on the health of organisms that live in and around a river? So take a minute and answer that question. Thank you for watching the video. If you need to go back at all and review any parts of the video, feel free to do that, and I'll see y'all in class.